But I'd like to start by picking up 2 points that were raised in the introduction. Thank you very much for that. First of all, I'd like to make clear my experience in Northern Ireland. I was a very junior lieutenant and appointed to command a patrol boat in Northern Ireland whose mission was to interdict trafficking, not just firearms and explosives, but also the considerable criminal trade which existed between the continent and Libya, the south of Ireland and Ulster, in drugs, tobacco and alcohol. And I say this because this was a military task, and I did everything from searching quite large container ships at sea off Ireland, and also at the very dangerous port of Warren Point. And I took up my appointment, which was for a year only. Just my predecessor, in fact, had to deal with the terrible bombing in Warren Point, where quite a large part of his team of Royal Marines were killed. And this was, of course, 1981, the heart of the Troubles, the Bobby Sands hunger strikes, which are so notorious. And so that particular appointment taught me an enormous amount. I had about 35 Royal Marines and sailors under my command, and I worked for the garrison commander at Crossman Glen, right on the border, because that was my area of operations on the maritime border of that particular part of Northern Ireland. And that was quite a searing experience and really set the foundation for later on and everything since. It was very tragic. I didn't lose any of my own men, but as a result of my work locally, 2 customs officers from the Northern Ireland Customs Service were assassinated as a result of work I'd done there at Warren Point. And that sort of brings the whole business of defence and security very, very close to home. Later on, in the mid-80s, I was working, and most of my career was spent in the Middle East and the Far East. I spent a lot of time in the Arabian Gulf and Persian Gulf. And in the mid-80s, I was involved dealing with the Iranian threat to Bahrain in particular, and they carried out various mining operations off the port of Bahrain, and I was engaged in that. But what I'm about to say is quite controversial. What we became aware of as part of the British task group, which consisted of about 17 ships at the time, which, putting it in context, and the reason I'm telling you this is because today we have 19 frigates and destroyers in the Navy. At that time, in 1985, we had that number almost deployed in the Middle East. But one has got to look very closely at the intentions of one's allies. And if I tell you that I witnessed Iranian oil tankers being targeted by Iraqi missile-firing aircraft and assisted by a very large ally, it sort of puts things into context a little bit. Later on, I was very fortunate to command a destroyer in the mid-90s, and we were involved in UN embargo operations, which you may recall that we were 2 or 3 UN resolutions, I can't remember the numbers of them, 1248 or something like that, whereby the UN had said they wanted to blockade Iraq so that no oil was exported, so that they couldn't finance their military operations. And I spent quite a lot of time just south of Qasr and Basra in that area, effectively conducting what is a very, very traditional operation, which is naval blockade, and ensuring that the Iraqis were unable to smuggle oil out of the country. In actual fact, every night very small tugs towed very large semi-submerged drones pumped up with oil and regularly smuggled 500 tons, 1,000 tons at a time. Small quantities relatively, but if that's done every night, it breaks the embargo operations. Our very large ally had something like 15 ships up there, and the trade continued. I'll leave it like that. I'll revert to my script now. I want to begin with an anecdote. This is purportedly an exchange of telegrams between President Truman, General Douglas MacArthur, and Admiral Chester Nimitz immediately preceding the Japanese surrender agreement. It was supposedly, and I say this, supposedly found in the Truman Library Museum in Independence, Missouri. The exchange literally took place just before the signing, and it's a series of telegrams which I'll just very briefly read. The first one is between Truman and MacArthur, or to Truman from MacArthur, sorry. Tomorrow we meet those yellow-bellied bastards and sign the surrender documents. Any last-minute instructions? MacArthur received a reply from Truman as follows. Congratulations, job well done. You must tone down your obvious dislike of the Japanese when discussing the terms of the surrender with the press, because some of your remarks are fundamentally not politically correct. And MacArthur and Chester Nimitz replied together to Truman and said, Wilco, sir, both Chester and I are somewhat confused. Exactly what do you mean by the term politically correct? And the purported response was as follows. Political correctness is a doctrine recently fostered by a delusional, illogical majority and promoted by a sick mainstream media, which holds forth the proposition that it is entirely possible to pick up the clean end of a piece of shit. So I'm going to make a series of sort of summary points here. My first point is that political correctness, and that was back in 1945, is a significant impediment to open debate about our national life and defence in particular. That's my first point. So what about defence? 2015 is an auspicious year for defence analysts. We're well on the way to the full demolition of yet another Amazonian rainforest. It's not only midpoint between the 2010 Strategic Defence and Security Review, SDSR as it's nicknamed, and its intended full implementation by 2020, known as Future Force 2020. But also this year is the year of the 2015 Strategic Defence and Security Review. You don't have to be a member of Mensa to immediately see that there's a tacit admission of a problem, or, being politically correct, a challenge. Why do we need yet another review when we've not yet fully implemented the findings and decisions of the 2010 affair? Let's unpick this a little bit more. And this is my contention, is that the 2010 strategic review was stillborn. This lemon was doomed and perhaps designed to fail. Indeed, the need to readdress the matter 5 years on is self-evident proof of its failure. A strategy without a vision, flawed assumptions based upon fixed resources to counter unquantifiable threats without any context as to our strengths and weaknesses at just the start. The infantile, and in my view, intellectually unsound and yet academically accepted methodology based upon a mantra of, and these are technical terms, ends, ways and means, completely ignore any view of a positive future. Or should I say, there is no statement of our national interests whatsoever. So my second point is that common sense, a lack of a rigorous, honest analysis has ensured a flawed approach, and therefore a defence capability which cannot even be declared unfit for purpose, as there's no basis for any measurement. Intuitively, there is clearly a problem. There is no strategy. I've taken my data from the 20-odd fact sheets that the government produced at the end of 2010, and you can get these on the web, to explain what the Defence Review in 2010 came up with and its terminology. I'm not going to quote the whole lot, because after lunch that would finish you off, but I want to focus on one particular aspect of that, and that is the some really astounding results that came out of it, and it really does illustrate how far we've fallen. The methodology begins with a thing called strategic context. Some of these terms are sort of quasi-technical in defence and Ministry of Defence speak, but they're pretty self-evident. But it immediately defines this so-called strategic context by a statement about operations, and I want to draw out the levels of, if you like, management or direction of defence. There is the strategic level, there is the operational level, and there is a tactical level, and you can understand, without getting into the technical definitions of that, where we are. How many times have you heard a politician say, "We don't comment on operational matters, that is for the operational commander"? You hear this in the context of the police, you hear it in the context of military matters as well. This may appear to be a very semantic point, but the whole exercise of this review pivots on a mind-melded piece of Orwellian new speak. That's quite good though, isn't it? The conflagration of strategy and operations means that there's no need to address the key issue of strategy, and therefore the result of the so-called analysis does not apparently need justification based on a vision or a strategy. The real force of this comes to bear when the flawed assumption of fixed finance, which is very important, is set against woolly statements of need. It's a bean counter's paradise as it locks the operational level into impossible compromise. How do you explain the provision of Land Rovers in Afghanistan that could not protect our troops? How do you explain the lack of a full set of body armour in Iraq for our troops? It's because the operational level hangs in a no man's land where the resource is not matched to the task set by the politicians. So you can see this fundamental imbalance between what you want to do at the high level and the resources and what you want to actually do at the operational level. It's a very fundamental point. But my third major point is that there is actually no national strategy. What do you think the UK sees itself doing? I don't have an answer, because there's no statement about it. I'll go on to expand. But before I address the rest of the methodology, I just want to show why I use this word infantile, which is pretty strong. But I want to read you, quote exactly from these fact sheets, what is sketched out as the strategic context. There are 4 bullet points, and they are, I found this very difficult to understand, but anyway, the first one is the current security situation. Yeah, I don't know what that is. Trends and uncertainties affecting our security situation in the future. Okay. The particular position of the UK and the strengths and skills that we bring to bear, areas of UK comparative advantage. The 4th point is the positive contribution of our allies and partners and of the private sector, and the negative effect of adversaries seeking to thwart our objectives. I view these as vacuous statements. They tell us nothing about the strategic context. They certainly don't address strategy. This was signed off by the Cabinet, Or was it just written by an intern in the Ministry of Defence? I don't know. But that is the basis of the Defence Review in 2010. So my fourth point is that it appears that, it all sounds very good, it's good flute music as I call it. My fourth point is that form presides over fact. There is nothing substantial here. It's extremely difficult in the context of political correctness, the common sense famine, and any clear aim to challenge any of these statements. Of course they're all right, yes, of course they're all right, but what does it mean? It fails the so what test. And this is the basis of planning for a department which spends £38 billion a year. Now let us turn to the remainder of the approach based upon this flimsy strategic context. The first great statement moves from the sublime to the unachievable. Ends. What do we seek to achieve? That's the definition. And I'm quoting directly now. The National Security Council used the strategic context to establish two high-level objectives to guide the strategic approach. My comment. Note the rather unmistakable change of emphasis. We move from strategy to strategic approach. There is no strategy. That's why you need a strategic approach. It just doesn't fit. And then I quote again. They set then two high-level objectives. This is the logic leap from that statement to the two high-level objectives. First one is to ensure a secure and resilient UK by protecting our people, economy, infrastructure, territory and ways of life from all major risks that can affect us directly. The second one is to shape a stable world by acting to reduce the likelihood of risks affecting the UK or British interests overseas, and applying our instruments of power and influence to shape the global environment. Best of luck. So that's all right then, isn't it? We're home and dry. It sounds okay. We've hit all right buttons. But in my view, it's flawed as an argument to justify what is needed by embedding our objectives in assumption about our means. Because that's what that does. It assumes a lot about the means. It situates, as we say in military speak, the appreciation of what there is there. We get into the next step. The ways. Right, so we started off ends, ways, and means. How do we seek to achieve these ends, which are obviously very clear now, aren't they? How do we seek to achieve these ends? Well, this turns out to be a list of national security tasks. And there are quite a few of them, but I'll rattle through very quickly just to illustrate my point. And there is bullet points as follows. Identify and monitor national security risks and opportunities. Tackle and root the causes of instability. Exert influence to exploit opportunities and manage risks. Enforce domestic law and strengthen international norms to help tackle those who threaten the UK and our interests. Protect the UK and our interests at home, at our border and internationally, in order to address physical and electronic threats from state and non-state actors, and so it goes on. By this time, I became profoundly depressed, I have to admit. So illustrating my fifth point, there is a lack of a credible methodology here. It just doesn't hang together. And I believe this is the root cause of this failure in the Defence Review that was carried out in 2010. But I'd like to go on, and I'd like to set this against a risk assessment study. And I'll quote directly again. The approach builds on the existing, and of course it's classified, national risk assessment by extending the approach to 20 years. So an even bigger failure there. This is a 20-year look at looking at risks. And covering all national security risks, including overseas events. I should hope so as well. A full range of risks was analysed, giving greatest weight to those who are more likely to occur, which are more likely to occur, and which would have greatest impact. The most important risks to the UK national security were then placed into 3 tiers, in other words, 3 priorities. And I will just read to you the top 4 priorities. So this is what your government has set in 2010, had said in 2010, as the top 4 risks for UK, for our defence and our security. Hostile attacks upon UK cyberspace by other states and large-scale cybercrime. Any talk customers here? And international, and of course this is not defence business, is it? This is police business now. So I'll come back to that theme in a minute. I'm showing you the disaggregation of our national effort. This is what I'm trying to illustrate here. Second, an international military crisis between states, drawing the UK, its allies, as well as other states and non-state actors. A few examples of that around. International terrorism affecting the UK or its interests, and a significant increase in terrorism in Northern Ireland. That is in the top priority list. And finally, a major accident or natural hazard which requires a national response. Wait for it. Such as severe coastal flooding affecting 3 or more regions of the UK, or an influenza pandemic. I hope my irony isn't lost on you. But there are 2 other tiers of which I have the details and might be able to talk about later, but I don't want to belabor this point too much. Basically, I have a fundamental problem with the threat-based risk assessment because the analysis can only be subjective. It's based upon an incomplete knowledge. It does not take into account the absolute certainty of uncertainty of the future, and most importantly, it does not set risk against strategy. There is no strategy. Go back to that. The litmus test is to reflect upon the real world, this in terms of real world events and these perceived risks. And I think, as that was done in 2010, you can make your own judgment about that, as to how successful this risk assessment has been. Anyway, we come to the crunch now, the means. And of course, in these information documents, which I took from the web, means are described as the resources we can devote to achieving them. Nothing. Nothing is stated about the means at all. And yet this is the crux of this process, this methodology, to justify the defence forces we have. To me, this amply demonstrates that despite all words, the reality is that the defence budget is set by the Treasury. And it's them that actually dictate the basis of defence and security planning and the resultant capability. There is not a methodology. In fact, there's no need for one. The reality is the result of a fixed budget, rice bowls in terms of vested interest, and brutal political agreement. Well, we finally plunge into the world of toys, as I call them. The defence infrastructure, the people, the equipment, the soldiers, sailors and airmen. These are very important political fiefdoms, along with the numerous defence lobby groups and other lobby groups as well, that influence how the budget is carved out. Because this is all about state benefits, as so much of state spending in the UK is. My 6th point is amply illustrated hereafter. Political spin characterises the statement in the headline outcomes of SDSR 2010. The vacuous statements described below describe our hollowed out defence capabilities. Let us look at what SDSR 2010 produced in terms of equipment programmes and structural changes. So we're looking back 5 years now. So a lot has happened since then. 2 new aircraft carriers. Well, that's fine. One was to be equipped to allow full interoperability with our key allies. Well, That decision has been through a few iterations. You all know about the various volte-faces that have occurred in terms of their capabilities. But a political statement has been made that we're going to get both of them up and running. I'm not quite sure how they're going to be manned, as the Navy is about 4,000 people short pre-start of the mandate as of today. And that, by the way, is a Navy, including Royal Marines, of 28,000 people. The Metropolitan Police Force is nearly 50,000 strong. That gives you context. Introduction of a more capable carrier variant of the Joint Strike Fighter. This is the most expensive defence project ever in the world. It is costing hundreds of billions, the Americans. Each aircraft is due to cost in the order of £250 million. And it is running 5 years behind schedule, the programme. 6 state-of-the-art Type 45 air defence destroyers, well, in fact, they're in service now, so that's fine. 7 Astute-class Hunter submarines, they're just about all in service now. Replacing the very old Type 23 frigates with a frigate called the Type 26 frigate. Some of them have been ordered. Restructuring our amphibious shipping, which means actually we cut the numbers involved but just reorganised it a little bit. 5 multi-role brigades for the Army to operate worldwide. A significant increase in special forces, which in fact is probably the only area where real effort has been put to increase our national defence capability. I find it quite ironic, this is an aside, that we have a no boots on the ground policy. We want more special forces, and they are deployed, and they are ground forces. So I'll leave you that's a spin issue. It's hidden behind a security issue, but there are no boots on the ground, so that's why. Reducing the Army's non-deployable regional administrative structures. This is a euphemism for the 20,000 troops which have remained in Germany since the Berlin Wall collapsed in 1989. We still pay for the infrastructure for 20,000 troops and their families' dependents in Germany. It assists the German economy considerably. 12 new Chinook helicopters, they're being replaced. 14 strategic lift tank aircraft tankers. Withdrawal of maritime patrol aircraft. The UK uniquely, as one of the probably, well, of the 2 largest offshore continental islands, Japan and ourselves, uniquely has no maritime air patrol reconnaissance capability at the moment, and one has not yet been ordered. Introduction of the A400 transport aircraft, rationalising the defence estate. 75 air stations in the UK for an air force that is 30,000 people with less aircraft than Israel. I'm just pointing out the reality of this. And finally, to reduce the civilian workforce by 25,000 and military personnel by a further 17,000, thus reducing the Army to the smallest army we've had since, I think, Napoleonic times, 80,000. I could go on, but the message is clear. Obfuscation of the fact that the budget drives defence capability. I'm not saying the budget shouldn't be part of the decision, it clearly should be, but it is the basis of the size of the defence force, not what is needed. There is a fig leaf of pseudo-logic to disguise this fundamental lack of strategy and a spun presentation to compensate for this muddled thinking. When I worked in the Ministry of Defence, we used to call it the madhouse. That was our nickname for where we worked. The real problem is that it is bedlam, and the lunatics are running the place now, it seems. I've always criticised those who criticise but don't come up with an alternative. So what I'd very quickly like to do is paint a brief vision, and I'm not saying this is what should be. What I'm doing is saying there are solutions out there to fix this problem. And I'm going to read, I hope within the time, a very quick resume of something that has been put together by a group of us to describe a solution for this. I've already said that the UK doesn't have a national strategy, so I'd like to really start with that. There is a well-known professor, Gwyn Prince, who outlined, and he has been an advisor to the National Defence, outlined the methodology, which begins by the identification of national interest. And I think that's what's missing here. Nobody has come up with a clear statement of what our national interest is. It's really fundamental. And it's interesting listening to this morning's talk that this is a theme that seems to come out all the time. What is our national interest? Post-imperial UK has a legacy which includes our European culture, democracy, global lingua franca, Commonwealth, 40 independent overseas territories, a permanent seat in the United Nations Security Council, and a plethora of international bilateral agreements. Added to which, there is this post-imperial momentum, globalisation, renewed nationalism, continental regionalism, all which make up a complex and conflicting patchwork. Furthermore, and it's a point that was raised earlier, the impact of and the emergence of cyberspace has yet to be fully felt. The physical world today is not all of our world, but it is part of a changed paradigm. Previous assumptions are being challenged. Individuals are redefining their citizenship and questioning nationality. They define themselves as a part of this new world, however much one may disagree with it. They're unconstrained by national boundaries. They, freed from being represented nationally, and able to communicate multilaterally and instantly around the globe. Social and government structures, I'm afraid, have to change to meet this. Influence is moving from the nation state in some areas to people who are really cyberspace citizens. Just get onto London transport as I can see how many people are sitting in the train looking like this. There are a lot of them around. Anyway, our top vital interests, this is a proposal, so just take it to that and you can shoot me down. Our top vital interest in a closer international community, in a more densely populated world, must be engagement with other nations to influence events and decisions. Naturally, this has been the basis of most diplomatic effort in the UK for many years. This political interest is both dependent upon and vital to a dynamic economy and technological advancement, which thus make up three vital interests. There are other interests. They're essential but subordinate. Pursuit of a democratic international legal framework, a sustainable environment, and continuance of our culture, which has been talked about widely today. The consequential questions concerning, for example, membership of the Security Council, World Trade Organization treaties, etc., should be discussed after we've decided what our national interests are. A grand strategy is focused on the formulation of the security measures to ensure that our national interests can be sustained. Political matters are put at the heart of our vital interests. Political status must be recognised as a legitimate coinage in international relationships, and this is the crunch. To this end, we must be prepared to engage in policing the international stage, to enforce agreed international political agreements. We must learn to put our strategic interests above our hitherto national relationships in order to underpin our vision and forge a secure and peaceful future. I'm going to skip a little bit there. I go into the methodology very, very briefly, using those 5 national interests. If you do what is called in business talk a SWOT analysis, in other words, look at the strengths and weaknesses and the opportunities and threats, what you come up with, if you've done this, and if anybody's interested, I can show you in detail the work. What you come up with is that the opportunities represent our interests and what we want to preserve and look after, and not just preserve, but to pursue. That's very important. Rather controversially, I'm now going to put forward an example of how, probably not liked here, how revolutionary some of the ideas are that some of us are thinking about in terms of the structure of the security forces that will be required in the future. And it's a creative leap to achieve this. The cost to mitigate the risk of uncertainty is a very fine political judgment which needs to be addressed. The solution to meet the inherent uncertainty needs to be grounded in this grand strategy. No grand strategy exists, and therefore there is an unwillingness to consider any change as to how our scarce resources are deployed. Indeed, there is no benchmark for success or failure of our contingency other than ad hoc decision-making, financially driven risk mitigation, and dislocated policy decisions. So what I'd like to put forward now is a vision, if you like, a picture of a possibility. And it's really to illustrate what I'm saying and how things, if we're going to make a difference within limited resources, we may have to go. And I see seeds of this happening already. So a proposed solution is a fundamental reorganisation at the heart of our government. And I see this starting at cabinet level, where the National Security Council, which does exist and reports to the Prime Minister, should be changed a little bit and co-chaired by 2 completely new ministries, which subsume Foreign and Commonwealth Office, the Department for Spending Money Overseas, you know what I'm talking about, DFID, and with their £8 or £9 billion budget, and the Ministry of Defence. It's a radical move that it puts these under two organisations. A Secretary of State for External Affairs, now you can call it Foreign and Commonwealth Office if you like, external, and then the Home Office or Internal Affairs. And these 2 Secretaries of State should co-chair this National Security Council as guardians of this national security strategy. And the most important step is that we create a new civil force to deal with cyberspace. Because at the moment, it is split across, last time I counted, about 8 agencies. And this is one of the problems, if you've been reading the Talk issue, of how to deal with this threat that has taken down Talk. That there is so much multi-agency cooperation, or lack of cooperation, or need for cooperation. Because the Met Police have a finger in this, the Foreign Office do under the guise of GCHQ, other security services have an involvement, Defence has an involvement, the Home Office has an involvement, and so forth and so on. There is no central point in the UK for securing cyberspace, and I'm talking about commercial security as well as national infrastructure security. It is because we just haven't caught up that elements like the Talk issue are pretty significant in pointing up this failure. I don't want to prejudge what comes out of it, but my understanding is that it could be a state innovation. The Chinese and the Russians have incredibly well developed cyberspace warfare capabilities, which they use regularly. There is a well-documented case where they took down Estonia completely. Traffic lights were being controlled from another nation. It's that level of interference. How many of you have a mobile phone here today? How many of you have it turned off? How many of you know that you can still be geolocated with it turned off? Right. The only way not to be geolocated is to take the battery out of the SIM card. I'm probably catching on to somebody else's talk in a minute, but I'm just giving you an example. Yeah. So basically, what I'm saying is that we should have these two, if you like, super ministries set up to take control of these defence forces, and we need to look at the traditional organisation of the three main services: Army, Air Force and Navy. We need to do a lot more things jointly in that sense, and I think that there needs to be a massive rationalisation in terms of our civil defence, in terms of police, and also our emergency services. The UK is virtually unique in running its civil emergency services in the way it does. I happen to live in France. There is a centralised control for national emergencies, which integrates the armed forces with the civil forces, ambulance, everything you like, firefighting, a lot. And it's very highly organised and responsive. As it happens, 10 years ago, my village was completely flooded. There was a massive flash flood. The next day, we had 2,500 troops and civil defence workers billeted beside the village fixing it. I don't think that happened in Cornwall last year. I'll leave it at that.